Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Good evening. My name is Harvey Glass, and I'm an alcoholic. I want to thank Joe and the committee for inviting me. It's really been fun. I've had a great time. Gina and Tommy were great speakers last night and today. I learned a lot from them, and also found out that no matter where we're from, we're all alike. You know, it's just the way it is. I want to assure you that I'm a pure alcoholic. Just so any of you have any question, I only did drugs one time. For 18 years. And a wonderful 18 years it was, too. I'm a Jack Daniels drinker. I know there aren't any of you out there, but I love Jack. I drank Jack. I got drunk on Jack 2 weeks after my 12th birthday, and Jack and I were together for 27 years. I love Jack Daniels. Absolutely loved it. I loved the taste of it. I loved the smell of it. I still love the smell of it. When I had 9 months of sobriety, I explored the possibility of starting a men's aftershave lotion in the aroma of Jack. And my first sponsor told me that he didn't think that was a good idea. And I had no idea what he was talking about. I thought it was a great idea. But, you know, I'll tell you what happened to me. I got drunk 2 weeks after my 12th birthday, and I heard a guy say at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous one time that he believed that his invisible line into alcoholism were his lips. And I think that's what it was with me, because it did something different for me that night than it did for the guys I was drinking with. I've always had terrible fear all my life. Just getting out of bed was the worst thing that could possibly happen to me in the morning. And that was the last thing in the world I wanted to do, was get out of bed. And my fear always manifested itself into rage. And I was a rageaholic. Ever since I can remember, ever since I was a small child, I was a rageaholic. And what Jack did for me that night didn't do anything for the fear, but it brought the rage down. And literally from that day on, I was able to do things on a group level. Up until that point, I was a loner. I had some friends, but I was a loner mostly. But with Jack, I was able to do things on a group level, and I started to excel on the group level. And I loved it. I just loved it. I think I ended up in the bathroom that night with my head in the toilet, and my brother holding me down, and it didn't make any difference. You know, because I didn't think anything of it. It was a small price to pay for the feelings that I got. And I repeated that action as often as I could, which was usually the weekends. And basically, I won't bore you with a long drunk-a-log, because I did the same thing day after day after day after day. It was terrible. It was just terrible. And I basically went through college drinking and smoking dope and taking an occasional upper when I needed to be up for something important, you know, that never had anything to do with school. But my drunk-a-log is really boring, because I was really the kind of drunk that just did the same thing all the time. I drank in, I had my office on the Sunset Strip, and I drank in this little watering hole up there called the Cock and Bull. It's a great little bar, just great little bar and restaurant, actually. And I had my own stool there, fifth from the end. And I'd spend every day from 11:30 to 1:30 there for lunch. And then I'd go back to my office, and then about 3:30 I'd go up for my afternoon break and spend from 3:30 to 5 there. And then I go back to my office, and I get back up there again around 8 o'clock that night and stayed for however long it took, whatever the definition of it was that night. Because, see, my drinking and drug use that I did during the day was what allowed me to function. It allowed me to build my business, it allowed me to deal with my employees and my clients, and just function. But once I relaxed and I started to drink, I could never predict my behavior. Never knew where I was going to end up and what was going to happen. You know, and I'll tell you what my ambition was in those days. The guy that had the #1 stool was an old character actor named Frank Ferguson. And I break Frank's anonymity all the time because he never got sober, so the hell with him, you know. And when Frank died, they put a little brass plaque on the bar, and it said, "Here drank Frank." And I thought that was so cool that when I would die, they would find something to rhyme with Harv or Harvey and put it on I didn't know what, but I figured they were creative. They came up with, you know, "Here drank Frank," that they would find something to put on there for my brass plaque. That was my goal in those days. It was rather interesting. My wife and I went to the closing of the Cock and Bull when I had about, 7 or 8 years of sobriety. They actually closed the place. I outlived the place. And we went to this closing luncheon. It was really hysterical. There was a newscaster from Channel 2 standing in front doing the eulogy for the place, and just tears were coming down his cheeks, you know, because this guy had stool #7. You know, and people were in there, and everybody was crying, and we sat at this big round table. There were 11 of us, and only one person ordered a drink. At that time, there were 10 people that were sober. They're not still 10 people, but at that time there were 10 people that were still sober. It was incredible. It was incredible. But anyway, so that's what I would do day after day after day after day. And I'm going to tell you what my bottom was like and get into sobriety, because sobriety is much more interesting to me. I don't know about you guys, but it's much more interesting to me. My bottom happened in September of 1982. It was a Saturday. It was the morning of my daughter's bat mitzvah. Everybody know what a bat mitzvah is? It's like this Jewish confirmation. And I opened up the front page of the LA Times, and there was my picture on it. And not a real good one either. And it said, "Entertainment business manager indicted on 185 counts of grand theft." It was a mistake. Frame up, it was a mistake. And I had to go to this party with 400 of my ex-wife's nearest and dearest friends there and try to function. And that day was my bottom, because I walked into that room and I saw something that I may have seen before, but I never noticed. But I walked into this room and there were 400 pairs of eyes that looked at me with absolute disgust and revulsion in their eyes, like I was the biggest piece of dirt to walk into the room. And I probably was. And it was incredible. It was a trying experience, and I truly don't know how I got through it, nor how my daughter got through it. You know, she was 13 years old, the poor baby, and she had to go through this embarrassment of her father. And, but I didn't get sober. And the reason that I didn't get sober was I never had a problem with alcohol and drugs, never. It was always a solution. My problem were you people. If you just left me alone, I'd be fine. Just leave me alone. Leave me alone, I can handle it. I've got my solution, just leave me alone. But you wouldn't leave me alone. Oh, somebody's phone is going off. No, that's okay. The signer's phone is going off. And Tony said to me before the meeting, "Try to trip her up," and I didn't have to. I'm glad it wasn't mine. Could have been mine. I've had that happen. But anyway, so that was September of 1982. It wasn't until almost a year to the day later, on September the 17th, 1983, I was in temple for a holiday called Yom Kippur. It is the holiest day in the Jewish religion. It is the day we are there asking God to atone for our sins. And we sang this prayer called the Aleinu, the adoration, and I got very emotional over it, and I started to cry, and I got it. And I got that it wasn't the solution, that it was the problem. And I've been sober from that day to this day. September 17th, 1983 is my sobriety date, you know, and thank you. But I didn't say anything to anybody. And this was a Saturday morning, and I didn't say anything to anybody because I didn't realize the significance of what had happened. And I went home, and I was fine on Saturday, and I was fine on Sunday, and I was fine on Monday. And I woke up Tuesday morning, and I thought I was going to absolutely explode out of my skin. Every nerve ending in my body was on fire. I was just crazed. I was absolutely crazed. And I picked up the phone, and I called this guy named Tom Kenny, who was head of the Employee Assistance Program for the Motion Picture Health at the time. And I'd known Tom for years, and I called Tom, and I told him what was going on, and Tom knew what was going on. And he suggested that I go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And for some strange reason, I followed that advice. I don't know why, but I followed that advice. And I went to my very first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. It was called the Whatever Meeting. It was in Hollywood in those days, at the old IATSE Union Hall. It was nuts. You know, I don't know how it is to get sober in Hollywood today, but back then it was crazy, and it was rocking. And I walked up the steps of this Union Hall into this meeting, and it was magic. It was just magic. It was called the Whatever Meeting because people were kicking whatever in the meeting. And they were bouncing off of walls, and there were fights in every corner, and chairs were flying through the air, and knives were pulled out, and the cops were up there every couple of weeks pulling some poor fool out of there. You know, it was 250 people firmly rooted in the problem, and I loved it. I just loved it, you know. My wife's sponsor likes to say that the dramas in Alcoholics Anonymous are like a city bus. You can get on one now or wait 20 minutes and another one will come by, you know? And I love that. I just love that. You know, and this meeting was great. And I ran into this guy named Jim Loeb, and I had known Jim off and on for about 15 years. We were both been in the music business, and Jim is the reason that I came to my second meeting. Because I didn't hear that you go to more than one meeting. I didn't hear anything that happened at that meeting. And I didn't see much because these may look to you like glasses, but to me they're mirrors. All I'm doing is looking at me, you know, and thinking about me and hearing my head. And I didn't hear much of what went on in that meeting. Jim pulled out a meeting directory, and he circled a meeting for the next night, and he said, "Harv, if you come to this meeting tomorrow night, we'll go out for dinner afterwards." And it had been a long time since anybody had invited me out to dinner, and that's why I went to my second meeting. Now, I talk about Jim all the time because when I had 8 months of sobriety, Jimmy, who could never put together 30 days, killed himself. And I don't know why 22 years later I'm sober and Jim's dead. I refuse to believe that God loved me more than he loved Jim. I won't buy that. You know, what I have to believe is that God's grace is that he shows us his program, and then it's up to us to work our butts off to stay sober. Because it's not easy. It's hard. Hell, when you think about it, it's un-American, you know? This is a drug and alcohol society we live in. I stole my first big book at that meeting. The secretary, who I see almost every Thursday night when he's in town at my home group, and he never fails to remind me of this, but the secretary got up after the meeting, at the end of the meeting for his announcements, and he said, "Newcomers, if you don't leave here without a copy of the big book, and if you can't afford one, liberal credit terms will be made available," which I thought was very sweet, and I couldn't afford one, but I had too much pride to tell you, so I took it. Didn't read it, but I took it. The following week, somebody mentioned the steps, so I took the 12 and 12. The week after that, somebody talked about spirituality, and in those days, the 24-hour day book was still on the approved literature list, so I took that one. I took them all. I've got them all, you know, and when I had 8 or 9 months of sobriety, it was really kind of funny. When I had 8 or 9 months of sobriety, Tony asked me to lead the meeting. And I said to him, I said, "You know, Tony, I think I may owe this group an amends." And he said, "No, really?" He said, "We all know you're a thief, Harv. We're just waiting for you to cop to it, you know." Now, I want to tell you what a different guy I was as soon as I got sober, just so some of you who are new and you can spot the changes immediately. Prior to getting sober, I used to carry with me in the car an Ingram 9mm machine pistol with a 47-shot clip. Because they were out there and I never knew when, you know, they would attack, so I had to be ready for it. And I want to tell you, I only pulled it out one time. Back in the 70s, during the gas crisis, somebody cut me off for my gas pump. And as we all know, that was a capital offense in those days, and I reached under the seat and I pulled out baby. That's what I used to call it, was baby. And I slapped the clip in and I jacked it up and I pointed it at the guy, and he did the only thing he could have done was he got out of there. Because I don't know what I would have done. You know, at that point I'd been up driving around for about 3 weeks and I needed gas. But now I'm sober. Actually, I don't have that gun anymore. Actually, the district attorney has that gun, but that's another story. That's one of those specific stories we don't go into. And I had a little 25 millimeter Beretta that I carried right here in a waist holster, right next to me. For the first 4.5 months I came to meetings, I carried this gun. Because you people scared the bejesus out of me. I'm telling you. You were so animated, you scared the hell out of me. I mean, it was just amazing. And I carried this gun. I used to, it was really funny. I used to wear these nylon warm-up pants for my ever-expanding waistline, and a t-shirt and a ratty old corduroy jacket, and I had baby right here. And I never once pulled it out at a meeting. Never once. And I reached for it a lot. And every now and then, if you got too close, I'd pull my jacket back so you could see her, you know. but I never pull it out at a meeting. And when I had 4.5 months one time, I pulled up into the parking lot of this meeting, and I reached for it, because I used to carry it in the car, and I reached for it, and I said, you know, I don't need it in there, and I left it in there. I felt safe in the meeting. And then pretty soon, I stopped carrying it in the car. Talk about my ever-expanding waistline. I put on 85 pounds when I got sober. I used to lie and say 25 I needed. I think maybe I needed 2, you know. But I put on 85 pounds, and because instead of this combination of Jack Daniels and drugs, I was doing a gallon of Jari's ice cream every 3 days, you know, without a spoon. I would just soften it up and stick my face in it, you know. I love eating ice cream now. I still love eating ice cream that way. I'd rather drink it than eat it. I love that. And they told me I could lose the weight. I didn't care. All I wanted to do was stick around. You know, I got this sponsor when I had, I think, about 6 weeks of sobriety, and it's really strange. For some reason or other, and I don't know what it was, I was willing to go to any lengths to stay sober. I don't know why. I don't know what the motivation for it was, and I don't know what triggered that, but I was willing to go to any lengths to stay sober. And I got this sponsor, and he got me into doing things, you know, and being involved and being in the center of AA. And I remember I called him, I had about 3 months of sobriety or 2.5 months of sobriety, and I called him up. It was like 11 o'clock in the morning, and I was yawning. And he said, "You tired from the morning already?" I said, "No, I just got up." And he said to me, "Do me a favor, will you?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "I want to talk to you about something. Meet me at the log cabin tomorrow morning for the meeting." Now, the log cabin was a meeting about a half an hour away from my house. It started at 7:30 in the morning. And I said, okay, you know, this guy had done a lot of favors for me, and he cared about my sobriety and about me, and I figured the least I could do was he needed my advice and needed to talk to me, so I would go meet him the next morning at 7:30 in the morning. And so I go to the meeting, I show up, and I guess he was a little too shy, he didn't want to talk to me about that. And we finished the meeting. He said, "Let's go get breakfast." And we went, got breakfast. It was an hour meeting. It was over at 8:30. We had breakfast about 9:15. He said, "All right, I got to go to work. I'll see you in the morning. See you tomorrow morning." And boom, and he left. And I thought, well, you know, I guess he's just a little shy. Didn't want to talk to me about his problem. Maybe we'll do it tomorrow. And for the next 14 months, we never got to his problem, you know. But I was there 5 mornings a week at 7:30 in the morning. I never yawned. When I yawned at 11 o'clock, it was because I was tired. Because we'd go to an 8:30 meeting that night, which was over at 10. Then we'd go out and feed our face, you know, from 10 to 11:30. I wouldn't get home till midnight from the meetings, and then I'd go to sleep, or sometimes I'd be so jacked up on the coffee, because I'd sit in a meeting and have 5 cups of coffee and 9 cigarettes, you know. It's just and then we'd go out and get pie and coffee. You know, I didn't know what decaf was, and we just so who knows when I finally fell asleep, you know. But I would, and I never, you know, lack of sleep never killed me. So I just go to the meeting at 7:30 in the morning. We did a lot of 12-step work, We're going up and down through Hollywood, picking people up and bringing them to meetings and talking to them and cleaning up their house a little bit and doing all sorts of things. And after a year, I said to him, I said, Bill, I said, you know what? I said, we've done all these 12-step calls. Not a one of these guys has stayed sober. He said, you're wrong. I said, what do you mean I'm wrong? I go to the meetings. I don't see them. He said, we're sober. And I got it. I got what it was all about. When I had 9 months of sobriety, I was sitting in a meeting, Sunday morning, Sunday noon, Ohio Street, sitting in this meeting, and I admitted to my innermost self that I was an alcoholic. I don't know why, I just admitted to my innermost self that I was an alcoholic. And poof, the obsession was gone. Now, I don't know if the obsession left me that moment, or it had left me the week before or the month before. All I know is that that's when I realized that the obsession was gone. That's how things have happened with me in my sobriety, is that I never know when they happen. All I know is the realization of that something has happened. And I've been slow on the uptake. You know, I am a different person today at 22 than I was at 20. And I hope to God I'm a different person at 24 than I am today at 22. I've been in constant change. That's what staying in the now and staying in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous has done for me. It's incredible, the love. I said to him, he said some pearls of wisdom to me. I said to him one time, I said, how many meetings do I have to go to? And he didn't tell me 90 meetings in 90 days like I hear so many people say. He said, we go to meetings. We go to meetings. He said, are you working? I said, no. He said, you go to meetings. Got nothing else to do. And then I said to him, how long do I got to go to those damn meetings for? And he didn't tell me, oh, until you want to. He said, 18 months. I said, okay, I can hang for 18 months, you know. Now, it never dawned on me, he had 4.5 years, it never dawned on me to ask him why he had 4.5 years he was still going to meetings. But I didn't care about him, I'm only looking at me, so I don't know what's going on. When I had 60 days of sobriety, I said to him, I said, nobody talks to me at these meetings. He said, listen, the next guy that comes up to you and asks you how you're doing, tell him the truth. I said, okay. I'm standing at this meeting, this guy Richard comes up to me. He said, how you doing, Harv? I said, man, I've had the worst day of my life. He says, let me tell you about my day. And he starts to talk. And I'm thinking to myself, this SOB, I just told him I've had the worst day of my life, and he doesn't even want to hear it. He's talking about his day, and he's going on and on about his day, and then I got it. I'm not listening to him either. So I started to talk. So he's talking to me, I'm talking to him. 10 minutes later, he hits me on the shoulder and says, great talking to you, man, I'll see you later, and walked away, and we've been friends for 22 years. And when we see each other, we still both talk at the same time. It's crazy. It's just crazy. When I had 17 months of sobriety, I finally had to go to court for this court hearing to find out what they were going to do with me, you know, because they didn't know what to do with me. The district attorney didn't know what to ask for because they had conflicting probation reports, and my lawyer was too loaded to know what to ask for, well, could I have that? What happened was that I got the lawyer, I was still getting loaded, and then I got sober and he didn't. But I'd already paid him, so there was nothing I could do about that thing. And the judge knew what to do. He congratulated me on my obviously sincere attempt to rehabilitate myself, and then he banged that gavel down and he sentenced me to 5 years in state penitentiary. Boom. Just like that. I was a little bit more shocked than you are hearing it. I was on crutches. I'd had my Achilles tendon reconstructed at the time, and I was on crutches so my bad leg couldn't move, and I wasn't about to move my good leg. And this marshal literally came up behind me and lifted me up and carried me out of that courtroom, dumped me in this holding cell. And I'm sitting in this holding cell, scared to death. I'm a 40-year-old upper-middle-class Jewish accountant, you know, at that point. You know, what the hell did I know from prison? And I didn't hear 5. I heard 5, 5, and 5, because that's what he sentenced me to. And then he ran them concurrently, but I didn't hear the running concurrently. All I heard was 5, 5, and 5. So I'm thinking 15 years. And I'm sitting in this holding cell, and I said the serenity prayer, and that didn't help. Whenever we say the serenity prayer at a meeting, I flash back to that moment. I said this prayer in my head, the Aleinu that I sang right before I got sober, and that didn't help. And then I thought to myself, if I ever hear at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous somebody say that their worst day of sobriety is better than their best day of using, I'm going to rip out their larynx, and the rage helped. I took the second half of the first step right there, first time. I'd given it a lot of lip service before about the unmanageability of my life, but I didn't believe it, because I'm a man, raised by John Wayne and my dad. And we're in charge of, men are in charge of their own destiny. We make our own fate. Just our sheer will alone can make things happen. And that's what I believed. That's how I was raised. And sitting in that holding cell, I knew that my life was unmanageable. You know, there's just nothing I could do. And I'll tell you basically what happened. 3 months later, they brought me back down into that judge's courtroom for what's called the sentence modification, and he knocked a year off my sentence, so I had a net of 4. And in California in those days, he did roughly half-time. I did 22 and a half months in state penitentiary and 5.5 months in a work furlough house. It's the reason I'm alive and sober today. There's not a doubt in my mind. Had there not been consequences to my actions, I wouldn't be here. No way I would have been, that I would be here today. I needed a place to go to make the amends that I would never be able to make. I needed a place to go to knock out my omnipotence and most of my arrogance. I needed a place to go that would show me that I was capable and worthy of being loved. People used to, I used to get 20 to 25 letters a week from people in this program. Every week, people were coming up to visit me. Every 2 or 3 weeks, these 2 buddies of mine would pack their car up full of newcomers and say, "You guys think you got it bad? Let's go visit Harv," and boom. And they'd come down and visit me there. It was just incredible. Now, personally, I believe all that could have been accomplished in a month, but I wasn't in charge of it, and it was obvious I wasn't in charge of it. Needless to say, I was the baddest guy in the joint. I'm telling you, it was weird. I mean, it was strange. For the first 3 days, I had to keep on correcting everybody. They kept on mispronouncing my name. My name is Harvey. They kept on calling me homie. So what is this? Then we caught the chain of the joint. Now, I know none of you really know about that, what that is, but because none of you have done some, well, maybe one of the homeboys in the back have, but none of you guys clean up too well. None of you guys have done that. But I'll tell you what catching the chain is. Doesn't that sound cool? We're catching the chain of the joint. Catching the chain of the joint is basically they handcuff about 40 fools to a long chain, toss their fannies on the bus, and drive them the hour to Chino, which was where the reception center was in those days. And except they didn't do that with me, because I was on crutches, and they figured if they put me back with all the guys, they'd take away my crutches and beat the you-know-what out of me with them. So they put me in this little room on the bus, which I thought was very sweet. Until I found out later that it's the high-powered room. So for about 3 weeks, everybody thought I was some sort of Jewish serial killer, so they left me alone. I got to tell you, it was a subculture I never knew existed. And the single most frightening thing about it was how well I functioned in there. Because what was in there was us. 90% of the guys that were in there were alcoholics and drug addicts. And we can relate to one another. Easily we can relate to one another, along with a few other things that happened. But we can relate, and it was incredible. Guy came up to me one time. I just gotten there. I'm sitting there, and this guy walks up to me and he says, "Is your name Harvey Glass?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I've been waiting for you." And I thought, oh, great, He said, "I got a letter from somebody in LA and the LAAA, and I'm the secretary of the AA meeting on the yard here." It was a reception yard, you know, kind of a transit yard until they figured out what joint to send everybody to. And he said, we have one meeting a week here, and it's on Sunday night, and I want you to come to the meeting. And do you need a big book or anything of that sort? And I did, and he got me one. It was really cool. It was really cool. I'll tell you one story, and then I'll get out of the joint. I was, maybe I'll tell you two. I've been down about 6 weeks, and I'm lying on my bunk, and I felt my bunk shake, and I looked up, and I knew that life as I had lived it was gone forever. Standing over me was this huge guy, shirt off, buffed up, I mean, really buffed up. Everybody in the joint worked out with weights, you know, not me, but everybody else did. And he's buffed up, he's got lightning bolts tattooed all over his body, he's got the 3-leaf clover over his left breast, which signifies the Aryan Brotherhood, he's got SWP for Supreme White Power tattooed over his belly button, and Oildale tattooed under his belly button. Oildale is this little city outside of Bakersfield. It's the only city in California, has its own Ku Klux Klan clubhouse, you know, and he looks down at me and he says to me, what I detect what I think is a little glint in his eye, glint of love in his eye, you know, and he says, is your name Harvela? Now, Harvela is what my mother called me. And if you've ever heard the definition of a Jewish mother, if you multiply it 1,000-fold, that was my mother. And I looked at this guy and I said, my name is Harv, where did you get Harvela from? And he said, well, your mother told my mother I'm supposed to talk to you.
Oh.
Now, what had happened was, my mother, who was 75 years old at the time, ran into this guy's mother and grandmother out on the visiting yard, and as was her wont, she talked to everybody. She said, what's your son in for? And they said drugs and alcohol. And she said, oh, isn't that a coincidence? So is my Harvela. Now, there's 6,500 guys in the compound. My mom thinks we're the only two with a problem, you know, but she doesn't know. She had no clue, so she didn't know. And she said, you know, you ought to have your son talk to my Harvela because my Harvela's been clean and sober for 1.5 years, and maybe he can help your boy. And that's what he was coming to talk to me about, was sobriety. And, you know, I gotta tell you, sobered up, we're all alike in a lot of ways. This guy had some strange ideas. I mean, he was a strange guy. He was state raised. He'd been coming to joint since he was 14. He was head of the Aryan Brotherhood in the southern prisons, not just one, but all the Southern California prisons. He was a bad dude, bad dude. I brought him into the Jewish temple and put a yarmulke on him, you know. And I said, hey man, that's what you gotta do if you wanna stay sober, you know, come at me with that. Come at me with that Aryan Brotherhood stuff, you know, and I'll bring it back to you. And I'd like to tell you he stayed sober. I'll tell you what happened. 3 years after I got out, I actually went back in on a banquet. If you can believe it, how stupid I was, but I went back in on a banquet because my best friend in the joint, Big Jim, everybody's got nicknames, Big Jim, who's now been sober 14, 15, probably 15 years now, 14 years. Big Jim went back in 3 more times to prove to himself that he was in fact an alcoholic and a drug addict, you know, and an armed robber for that matter, but had that problem too, along with everything else, you know, triple addicted, and and so homeboy and I, Triple B for Big Bad Bob. So homeboy and I are going in to see homie, you know, Big Jim, and I know how to say it now, you know, and they actually led us on the yard, and we walked the yard to where this banquet was being held, and in front of the banquet were like 40 guys that I had been down with. They were all back home, and they had heard that I was coming home, you know, so they all wanted to say hey to me, you know, it's all hey. They used to call me Had Money, you know, hey Had Money. And they told me about this guy, Randy, that he had just gotten out one more time. And he was going to stay sober with the church. That was his intention in those days. Now, this was 1990. Fast forward 10 years to the year 2000. I told this story at a meeting. And this woman comes up to me and she said, she's a private investigator. Would I like to find this guy? And I said, yes. And the next day she got his phone number. He had just gotten out of the joint one more time. He had never gotten off parole. He just kept on picking up new beefs. You know, so from 1985 to the year 2000, this guy was just on a revolving door, in and out, in and out, in and out. And I talked to him on the phone. We made arrangements to get together in 2 weeks, or 3 weeks. He was working up in Kern County, and he said, you know, Harv, I'm going to 2 meetings a day. Working the steps, I've got a sponsor. They told me if they bust me for anything, they're going to 3-strike me and just throw away the key. And I said, well, you got to be careful. And he lasted 3 weeks, and then they busted him for under the influence and petty with a prior. And they 3-striked him and threw him away for 25 to life. And, you know, I have a 32-year-old speed freak son that's out there who's got 2 strikes. And I'm scared to death that he's not going to get sober until he picks up that 3rd strike. My friend Triple B, Big Bad Bob, had 9 major felonies before he got sober. And if they had the 3-strike law back then, he never would have been out. So, needless to say, I'm not a big fan of trying to go back and straighten out their wrongs that they screwed up on in the old days of whatever the sentencing was. The last story I'm going to tell you about that was about the AA meetings in there. Now, if you walked into the mess hall in the joint, right, wrong, or indifferent, the penitentiary is a very segregated society. You walk into the mess hall, the whites are sitting here eating, the Hispanics are sitting here eating, and the blacks are sitting here eating. It's just the way it was. And then when you walked into an AA meeting, the whites sat here, the Hispanics sat here, the blacks sat here. And there was this guy that used to come in, his name was Bill H. And Bill had done 25 years behind bars in 3, 4, 5-year increments. And every time he went in, they made him a cook. And the last time, after 25 years, he had gotten sober, and he got off parole, and he went back to the penitentiary, and he applied for a job as a cook in the prison to get paid, to work for the staff. He was the single most qualified man to ever apply for the job, so they had to hire him, you know. They didn't want to, but they had to. And because he was in AA, they made him the liaison with the AA and NA panels that used to come in. And every time a panel came in, Bill came in with him. And when this guy talked, he's this old black guy. I got to stop saying that. Not that he was black, because he was, but that he was old, because the truth of the matter is, when I met him, he was 6 years younger than I am now, and I got to stop that, you know. But when he shared, nobody could see what color he was. This guy had an uncanny knack of speaking from his heart. And after the meeting, everybody wanted to talk to him, and everybody wanted a piece of him, and everybody loved him. And I asked this guy to be my sponsor and to take me through the steps. And I wrote an inventory for him where I told not every secret that I swore I would never tell, I told him every secret that I knew I could never tell. And I got every single thing out of me that had been burning deep inside of me for years. Everything. And I'd like to tell you that I saw the spiritual light and I felt part of and everything. None of that. None of that. But about 2 weeks later, I was walking the yard in my car, cruising the yard in my car. That's what they called the group you walked with, was a car. You never walked alone. You always were in a car, and we were together until the hubcaps came off. Homie, you know. See, I knew how to say it. I just, you know, didn't quite understand it, but I knew how to say it. And all of a sudden, I felt this freedom inside of me, this freedom and power inside of me, and I knew exactly what it was. I knew exactly what it was. And I decided to test it, and I went and I sat down and I prayed a little bit, and I prayed for the only thing that was important, and that was for him to get me out of there. And he didn't do it, so I got it that no was an answer. And but anyway, I got out of that prison. I went to this work furlough house, which was great. They allowed me to go to work every day. I'd come back in, I'd check in, and then they'd allow me to check out and go to an AA meeting every night, and then home on the weekends. And I was able to ease back into my relationship. My wife and I had been together for 26 years, drunk and sober. You know, and I was able to ease back into my relationship. And yeah, well, you know what? Sometimes I think that's a bigger accomplishment than 22 years sober. Or as equal an accomplishment as 22 years sober. But we're able to ease back into our relationship. And you know, what had happened in prison was she used to come out once, sometimes twice a week, and the only thing we could do was sit for hours. We would sit for 4, 5, 6 hours and talk to each other. And we'd actually known each other since we were teenagers. We had a lot of history, and we became best friends. That's what happened, and that's what we are today. We're best friends. You know, we can do everything together. We took up golf about 6 years ago, and we golf together, and we have a ball with it. You know, I don't golf good enough to get upset about it. You know? It's a humbling game, and I don't mind the humbling, but I sure don't like the humiliation part of it, you know. But anyway, so I was able to ease back, but I was full of rage. I still had that rage. And I remember I had this guy that I had asked to sponsor me, and I would call him in the morning, and I would just rage at him for like 10 minutes because I was working, I was in this work furlough house, and I was working for this woman who I'd known for 15, 20 years, and her mother worked with her, and she and her mother, can you believe this? They were treating me like I was a convict, like I was a thief. A convicted thief. How could they do that? I thought how unfair it was, and I would rage at this guy, and he would listen to me rage for 10 minutes, and then he would say, Harvey, I love you. Can you make it an hour and call me back? And I usually was able to make it about 2.5 hours, then I'd call him back, you know, and I would just do that. And then I changed sponsors not too long after that to get a man who had something that I wanted, which was self-respect. And I changed to this guy, and this guy was really an interesting guy, you know, and he was an appellate court justice at the time, and he was very involved in AA, and he taught me how to be a man, and he taught me how to have self-respect, and he taught me a number of things, you know. I'll tell you, I started sponsoring guys when I had about 4 years of sobriety. I got out of the penitentiary when I had a little bit, about 3.5 years. And I started sponsoring guys shortly thereafter that. And I was a terrible sponsor. I was the worst. Your happiness was my responsibility. And whatever problem you had, I had an opinion on. Not an experience, but I had an opinion on. And finally, when I had about 8 years of sobriety, the last guy fired me. And I called my sponsor up and I said, you know, I can't take this. I hate sponsoring. It's the worst thing in the world. I mean, all that happens to me is I get these guys calling me on the phone, whining all the time. They're whining and whining and whining, and it's driving me nuts, and I can't stand the whining. I just can't stand whining. And he said, no kidding, and hung up. And I remember I called him one time. I had about 5 years of sobriety. I said, listen, I got a problem. He said, how many newcomers have you talked to today? I said, what does that have to do with my problem? He said, call me back after you've talked to 2 newcomers, and he hung up. And I had a bunch of newcomers' phone numbers, and it took about an hour to find 2 guys that I could talk to. And I talked to him, and I called him back. And I said, okay. He says, did you talk to 2? And I said, I've talked to 2 newcomers. He said, what's your problem? I said, I don't remember. You know, just silly little valuable lessons. My first sponsor said to me, if you follow your primary purpose, if you stay sober and help another alcoholic achieve sobriety, the rest of your life will fall into place. And that was a hard concept. He also said something else. He didn't tell me, he said, let us love you until you can love yourself. He didn't give me that line. He said, you've spent too much time on yourself as it is. He said, let us love you until you can love somebody else, which I thought was pretty cool. And I didn't understand that until I was sober about 10 years, and then I understood it. You know, a lot of these things yet I don't understand right away. When I had about 9 years of sobriety, I called my sponsor, of course, after I'd talked to 2 newcomers. I called my sponsor and I was raging about something, and he says, let me ask you a stupid question. And I hate that. I hate that. Let me ask you a stupid question, because it's never a stupid question, you know, and it's always one that means it's going to necessitate some work, and I don't want to hear that. But he says, let me ask you a stupid question. I said, okay. He said, why is it that you're willing, excuse me, that you're willing to go to any lengths to stay sober, but you're not willing to go to any lengths to work on your rage? And I said, let me call you back on that one. And I hung up, and I called him back 2 days later, because I'm in no hurry. And I said to him, okay, I'm willing to go to any lengths to work on my rage. I don't know what to do, tell me what to do. And he had me start to do a diligent 10-step, where I write out every night or the first thing in the morning, whatever happened the day before, I wrote it out. Sometimes it was 3 lines, sometimes it was 3 paragraphs. There were a few times it was a couple of pages, but I would write it out, and then I would call him and read it to him. Sometimes I'd go over and have coffee with him and read it to him, if it were something really drastic, and I would read it to him. And then he would give me the instruction to call or go see those people and make the apology. He said, you know the difference between an apology and amends, don't you? And I did know the difference. An amends is a promise not to repeat the action. An apology is just an apology, saying I'm sorry. So I would make the apology, and I would make the apology, and I would make the apology, and I would make the apology to the same people for the same behavior over and over and over and over again. And then every time something would bother me, I would start to write. He used writing a lot. And it got to a point where I would write something and I'd call him and he would point out my part in it. And then it got to a point where I would write it and I didn't even have to call him because I could see my part in it. And then it got to a point where I would just start writing and I could see my part in it right away. I mean, these are the things that happened to me with that. When I had 12 and a half years of sobriety, we were still having a lot of problems with my son. It was still going on a lot. I was sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I admitted to my innermost self that no matter what happened, I was going to be okay. And poof, the rage was gone. Just gone. Just gone. It's been almost 10 years and the rage is gone. I haven't had a bout of rage in almost 10 years. I've been angry. Thank you. Thank you. I've been angry, but I haven't raged at all in almost 10 years. I think it happened somewhere around February or March of '96. I mean of '96. So it's been almost 10 years that I haven't had rage. And I was able to accept what went on with my son, and I was able to accept that if I in fact believe in a power greater than myself, that I have to believe that my son has a power greater than himself. And I have to believe that if my power is going to take care of me and look after me, that his power is going to take care of him and look after him. And I had to believe that, and I had to practice it. And it works about 360 days a year. I get about five, 6 bad days a year. There's just nothing I can do about it, you know, and that happens. And when that happens, I stay in it for as long as I can, and then I get on the floor and play with my dogs. And you can't stay depressed for too long when you're on the floor playing with a couple of dogs that are all over you. You know, it's just kind of my little trick to myself. But I don't do it right away. I kind of stay in it for a while, because I've got to stay in it for a while, because if I don't feel sorry for myself, who will? You know? So I've got to do that. I've got to feel sorry for myself a little bit. 15 years ago, we were in Seattle, and I told you about yes and no and how I believed that no was an answer. 15 years ago, we were in Seattle for the International Convention. It was the first one we were able to go to. I actually, in 1985, I applied to the warden to let me out on a temporary community leave so I could go to Montreal to the convention, but he wouldn't go for it, you know. And so we went to Seattle, and we walked into a meeting, and it was one of the smaller meetings. There were about 1,200 people in the meeting, you know, and every bit of floor space was taken. It was, Patty wanted to hear this priest speak, and he was the third speaker, and we sat down. We're in the front row because we sit in the front row, like Tony told me he was going to be in the front row, and we're sitting in the front row, and And this guy gets up and he talks, and he gave an okay talk, but there was something about him I didn't like. Something about him I just didn't like. And sure enough, at the end of his talk, he said that he's retiring this year. He's the warden of the Ohio State Penitentiary, you know. And I said to Patty, I said, you know, I don't like this guy. And then this woman gets up, and her name was Bibi from Brooklyn. And Bibi spoke in this high-pitched Brooklyn accent that to me is like fingernails on a chalkboard. And it was just driving me crazy. And I turned to Patty and I said, I'm getting out of here. And I stood up, and I would have walked out had there been any floor space for me not to step on people. That's how crowded this room was. I mean, there were just wall-to-wall people sitting on the floor everywhere. And so I had to sit back down, and she changed my life. She said that she believed that God gives 3 answers, not 2. Yes, not now, and I have something better in store for you. Isn't that wonderful? Yes, not now, and I have something better in store for you. And I started to go back in my life to all the no's, or what my perceived no's were. And they all turned out to be not nows, and some of them turned out to be, I've got something better in store for you. I've got the best life I've ever had, and it's not one that I wanted. Believe me, it's not one that I wanted or even ever thought about. I work at home. I'm an accountant. I was able to rebuild the tax practice and come back. I work at home. It's funny, my 2 employees are my dogs. You know, my traffic jam is stepping over them in the hallway on my way to my office. You know, it's incredible. Whatever my delusions of grandeur were, my aspirations or my goals, they never included any kind of happiness or peace of mind, because I didn't even know about those things. I didn't know that they existed. And I have a lot of peace of mind, and I'm happy most days. You know, I have a good life. 4 years ago, my wife retired. She's also an accountant. She works at home now. She does a small consulting business. Her office is on one side of the house, mine's on the other side, and we meet in the kitchen for lunch, you know, and it's cool. The first week that she retired, we went to Costco. I love Costco. It's like a casino. Every time you go in, you drop a couple $100, you know, and it's just wonderful. And we're walking in Costco, and we both stop. And we just look at each other, and she said, you know, we're cheating, don't you? And I said, yeah, I know, we're cheating. But we're here, and we're sober, and we're alive, and we've got the best life that we can have. Absolutely the best life that we can have. I will never be able to repay Alcoholics Anonymous for what it's given me. Never. I mean, I have a life today that is incredible for me. A week from Monday, this Monday night, tell you what I'm doing this Monday night. This Monday night, I'm going to the California Institution for Women at Fonterra for a banquet. I go twice a year to a banquet. Just sit with the girls in the Jewish temple, you know, there's like 40 of them. About 3/4 of them are in the program, and 90% of them are lifers. They all either did the murder or were in the room when the murder went down, all behind drugs and alcohol, all behind drugs and alcohol. The average one has been down about 22 years. You know, these girls have more hope than I ever had. Women, I should say, have more hope than I ever hoped to have. They're incredible. They're absolutely incredible. And I just love going down there. And then a week later, we're going to Maui for 3 weeks, for God's sakes, you know. We have clubs over there, and we just whack the ball as often as we can. We go to meetings. We have a home group over there. We have friends over there. We have a life. We have a life today, and it's all because of Alcoholics Anonymous. I will never be able to repay it, but I will try one day at a time for the rest of my life. Thanks for listening, and thanks for inviting me.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up, but the gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.